All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I know everybody has a very busy schedule, and I have about 30 tips that I want to cover, maybe some more, and it just depends on how fast we can get through them. And if anybody has any questions, they can just ask via the headset mic or put the question in the chat window, and I will try to answer them as fast as I can. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So this is Revit tips and tricks. These tips and tricks actually apply to not just the latest 2017 version, but it also applies to 2016 as well. Specifically, though, for 2016, you need to make sure you have Update Release 2 for one or two of the tips. So let's go ahead and get into it. Revit tips and tricks number 1, hardware specs, basic information. So we all know that in order to run Revit properly, we need to make sure we have the correct type of hardware, a desktop or a laptop. And one of the most critical things is going to be the graphics card. I have a link in the PowerPoint presentation that will take you to the Revit hardware compatibility checklist site. And from there, you can filter down into what version of software of Revit or part of the building design suite, what operating system, what type of graphics card manufacturer, NVIDIA or ATI, AMD. And then you can see and get a search for all the Gold Shield certified cards. And it's always recommended to start with a good quality graphics card like that. I would recommend at least a 2 gig graphics card. The processor. So most computers this day and age, when we're buying them for high-end Autodesk software level usage, most people, depending on their budget, will stick with an i7, a 2.5 gigahertz or higher. I think the current one's like 2.9 or 3.0. Some of them have a burst speed of like 3.6. And then there are also Xeon processor-based systems as well. So if you can afford it, go ahead and do the Xeon processors because that'll give you the multitasking, if you will. And what I mean by that is you can actually run several sessions of Revit. You can run several virtual machines and really just make the computer run a little harder. The RAM obviously is a big deal. Most computers this day and age will come with 8 or 16 gigs of RAM. The default used to be if you bought 32 gigs of RAM, you were pretty safe in using it for Revit and other Autodesk products. I'm starting to see now a lot of people are defaulting to 64 gigs of RAM. So if your system can handle it, put in 64 gigs of RAM. The hard drive also makes a big deal too. Most computers this day and age will come with a SATA spinning hard drive, but if you can afford it, go with a solid state, or if you can really afford it, go with the PCI M2 solid state cards. They're very, very tiny cards, but they're ridiculously fast. Their read-write speeds are about 8 times faster than most of the other types of solid state drives that are out there. Samsung makes a really good one, the Samsung 950 Pro, and I think there's a 960 out there. So, take good heed on the hard drive. In regards to the space of the hard drive, excuse me, a half a terabyte hard drive should be more than enough to hold the operating system and your software programs. And then as for your data, you might want to put that on another drive. And then the operating system. The operating system, everybody's always stuck with Windows 7 Pro 64-bit, and it makes a lot of sense. Although it's very hard to find a machine now to buy one with those spec'd in there. Everybody's running Windows 10 now. And, it's always been an issue with, will all my Autodesk software run on Windows 10? And now with the 2017 products, they are sanctioned to run on Windows 10 64-bit. So second tip and the third tip, keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to switch over to Revit. And as I do all these tips, I'll try to switch back and forth. So tip number 2 and 3 is basically keyboard shortcuts and using the Ctrl left click to drag the ribbon tabs. So let's take a look at keyboard shortcuts first. Here I am in Revit, and we know that we can go over to the View tab of the ribbon, User Interface, and head over to Keyboard Shortcuts. And in here, you can actually start typing in a command, say keyboard, and you'll see that it'll filter out. And I have an actual command for keyboard shortcuts for KS. So if I just type in KS, it pops up. Some people, they like to minimize or hide the project browser or the properties palette. We know that the properties palette here, if it's checked, you see it, and if it's checked here for project browser, you can see it as well. But you can make a keyboard shortcut for it to make it a little faster. So if you type in properties, you'll see that I have one set up already called PP. And then for project browser, I have it set for function 2. So if I go and hit my F2 key, my project browser disappears. And if I type in PP, the properties palette disappears. That makes your life a little bit easier when you're using keyboard shortcuts. The third tip is Control and left click to drag the ribbon tabs. So what this basically means is that as you're working with Revit and you're adding new things to it, new extensions, new add-ins, you'll get things like extension tab, you get Autodesk point layout tab, you'll get site designer tab, you'll get quantification, and they kind of just get thrown in there. There's not really a good rhyme or reason as to its physical placement. And it gets annoying because you jump from one machine to another and it doesn't really work very well. But if we go back to our tip, we can use the control key and the left click. So I can hold the control key down, left click and hold the tab that I want, and I can move my mouse and I can physically place it wherever I want. And now it's in its new position. And it just makes a lot of sense for you to physically move them back and forth like that, just to kind of sort it the way you want. Now, real quick tip as well, if you're running Microsoft Office products, for example here, the ribbon, if you use your scroll wheel and you scroll the wheel forward or backward, it actually cycles through from one tab to another, and it shows you the data in the tabs. It would be nice to see Revit do the same thing, but it's not. And maybe it could be something you guys might want to throw into the Revit wish list. Let's jump back to PowerPoint. Tip number 4, 5, and 6. Number 4 is drag and drop the recent locations in the open dialog box. What I mean by that is, if I'm in the open dialog box, we know that we can go to a specific folder, say downloads or documents, but you can actually customize this as well. So I created one for temp, and the way I did that was I just went over here in the drop down to the folder that I needed, and most people will go to tools, and they'll say add current folder to places. What a lot of people don't realize is that you can actually just left click and hold and drag and drop, and it puts it there as well. And then you can right click and remove it if you don't need it as well. So it's kind of a little bit faster way to put some put some shortcuts for the places that you go to all the time. The pick first element and hovering over. So what I mean by this is a lot of people kind of know this. Some people don't. When you hover your mouse over an object, it goes blue and it gives you a text description. If you hit the tab key, it highlights all the other objects that are joined to the ends of this object. Now, here's something interesting that a lot of people don't realize, is that when you do this, it also depends on where your physical cursor location is. What I mean by this is, if I put my mouse over this wall and hit the tab key, it knows to highlight just those, or it highlights just those, because it's cycling through between what it can see that's joined from one grouping versus another. If you're looking at it from the standpoint of the exterior walls, and I hit the tab, you'll notice that it's either going to give me the one single object or all the external walls. If I zoom in here, and I put my cursor on the inside wall, and I tab, or the outside wall, and I tab, it should jump and sequence between showing the connection between that wall, for example, this grouping here, or this outside grouping there. And so if I move my mouse from the lower bottom south end of the wall, you'll see certain walls are highlighted versus if my cursor is on the outer north portion of the wall, it's highlighting a different set of walls. So just be cognizant of the tabbing and where your cursor sits. Tip number 6, SZ is your keyboard shortcut for close all. And what I mean by this is, if I go in and I draw like this, a lot of people, they like to type in C for close or CL for close like they do in AutoCAD. They don't really have that in Revit. They have the SZ command. If you do this, it actually draws the entity back to the original starting point. Now, to finish this command, you would think you could just hit enter, but you can't, because if you hit enter, it breaks and it kind of disappears on you. And also, it might affect your properties palette. It's kind of weird. Some people will click the end and they'll call it a day. But what happens if you're trying to do this and you're nowhere near this endpoint to close? What you would want to do is just go through the process, type in SZ, and then click anywhere in space, and it completes the SZ close all command. It's kind of a nice little tip feature that works well. Tip number 7, 8, and 9. Number 7, using formulas for distances within the top and bottom offsets. So what I mean by that is, if I select this wall, we have a top offset and we have a base offset. A lot of people, they know just to type in the value that they need. But what if they're not sure because they have to add up some numbers? They can say is equal to a certain value, say 1 foot, plus, say, 0.125 inches. Because maybe I just can't remember how to, do math. It will automatically do the math for me, and it'll allow me to use that in the value for the top offset. Okay. Control drag. So a lot of people know that you can pick an object, hold the control key down, and move your mouse, and it drags and it creates another entity. It's kind of free form like this. I'm going to delete it. But if you do the same thing and you hold the shift key down, it keeps it aligned in position. And if you try to move your mouse at an angle, it won't do that. It keeps it aligned to that entity. Now, if I do the same thing on this angled wall, it keeps it aligned to that angled wall. See that? So that's kind of neat. You can use the shift key to, in combination with your control clicking, to create additional content. Spacebar to align to angle and circular objects. But a lot of people know that when you have a desk like this and you want to put it somewhere, if you have your mouse over an entity and you hit the spacebar, it aligns to that entity. If not, it aligns perpendicular, normal XYZ. But a lot of people don't realize that you can actually do it on curved objects too. And once you've done this, you'll see it kind of holds its positioning, if you will. So you can use the spacebar for flipping the object and keeping it aligned with certain entities. Tip number 10, 11, and 12. Number 10, oops, my things are off. Let's do all three. Attach the top and bottom of a curved wall to an angled reference plane. So if we have a curved wall here, we know that, let's head over to the 3D, and let's head over to this elevation. This is the curved wall. We know that on a flat wall, we can always select it, click Edit Profile, and we can change the shape of the wall and the design of the wall, like so. Okay, and it looks kind of interesting. But if it's a curved wall, we can't click Edit Profile. We can, however, use a reference plane, for example here, and attach it to that reference plane. Oops. And in essence, what you'll get is the curved wall is actually lining itself up to that angle. Okay? So that's another interesting trick that you can work with on curved walls. Rotate elevation marker with a rotation icon. So what we're talking about here for this tip is, a lot of times we work with the elevation markers, and we're kind of busy. We move pretty fast. And we put in an elevation marker like this. Well, this one, I didn't actually put it in, so it's perpendicular to this angled wall. It's just off. A lot of people will go to Modify. They'll go to Rotate. They'll pick this entity. They'll hit Enter. They'll move this dot over here as best they can. And they'll try to do this as best as they can, and it just doesn't work. You can just select the circle. There is a Rotate here. Click it and hold it and move your mouse, and it will snap rotate, and it will find the perpendicular. Okay. Pre-select objects to reduce the filter category list. So what we mean by this is as follows. I want to create a filter. So I can go to View, Filters, and you'll notice that if I start a new filter, Rule, let's call it, I don't know, Walls, and I hit OK, you'll see that it gives me a long list of all the possible categories to work with. And I just have to drag down, and I have to select it. Then I have to apply my filter rule. The tip here is if you select the entity that is of the category that you want first, then go into the View tab, go into Filters, create the filter, and hit OK, you'll notice that it automatically checks Hide Unchecked Categories, and it automatically highlights and checks the object category that you want to work with. And from there, you can go ahead and put in your filter. So that might be helpful for some who work with filters quite a bit. Tip number 13, 14, and 15. Copy-paste slope tag of a ramp in the top view of a 3D view to a plan view. So what does that mean? So I have a floor plan here, level 1, and I have a ramp. We look at it in 3D. Looks like that. And we know that, let me delete this one. We know that when we're in 3D, we can go over to the Annotate tab and do a spot slope. And it will look at the object and put it in. That's all fine and dandy. If we go to the plan view, we can't do it. It doesn't see it. It doesn't read it. It says no slope. It's a bit strange. So what you can do is just head over to the 3D view, go to a top view of the 3D view, get rid of the one that I did, put in the spot slope that you want. Now that it's there, select it, copy it to your clipboard, go back to the level 1 plan view, and then paste to the current view. Now, if you've done this, what's nice and what's interesting is that that annotation still reads off of this ramp. So if the properties of the ramp changes, what ends up happening is the readout will also change. So that's kind of a neat little trick to get the information for the slope on the plan view. Right-click the current view in the project browser to save as an image. So at any point in time, you can right-click any one of these views and say Save to Project as Image. It opens up the Save to Project as Image dialog box. You can give it a name that you want, ramp, image, close-up. And you can specify the different range that you want. You can specify the size, the zoom, things like that, and hit OK. And it automatically creates an image, puts it under renderings, and you can see what it looks like. It's a little grainy, but it kind of works. The other method is to go to the big blue R application menu, excuse me, export, scroll down till you get to images, and click image. It brings up the export image dialog box. It asks for a name and a location. It asks for the range. It asks for the image data, the format, so on and so forth. So this is a little bit more granular to do as well. And once you specify what you want, you click OK, and it will export that outside of Revit as an image file, not within your project browser list. Hold the delete key down to delete picking objects. Okay, so what we mean by this is I want to delete, say, these two walls here. A lot of people will just do a window crossing and they'll hit delete here, or they'll hit the delete key. if you hold the delete key on your keyboard down first and you just touch an entity, it deletes it faster. Because if I don't do that and I do this, then I do this, how many clicks did I have to go through to get that? You can also, if you go through this and then hit the delete, that's two. That's two. But if you hold the delete and you just click the entity, you're really only clicking once, if you will. Tips 16, 17, and 18. So tip 16 deals with face-based objects can see linked objects such as walls. So I'm going to close this file, and I'm going to go over to my next file, 16 through 20. So here we have a wall, and here's another curved wall. This is in the host file. This is a linked Revit file. We have a face-based family, and we have a wall-based family. If I select this wall host family and say CS to create similar, it'll automatically see that wall without a problem. But if I try to put it on the linked wall, it just won't see it. It just doesn't allow it. But if you use a face-based, it will automatically see the faces of the linked walls. So, and as well, obviously, of the host walls here. Now, things to take note. If I select this wall and I delete this wall, all the entities that are hosted by that wall disappear. If I delete the linked file, the objects remain. They've lost their host association. They've been orphaned, but you can pick a new one. But they're still there. So it's kind of one of these little tricks that you might need to do in regards to working with certain families that have to be wall-based versus face-based. An example would be electrical outlets. I used to work with we worked with one of our MEP clients, and they always had an issue where when they started with the default electrical outlets, those were wall-based. And when you select the wall and you deleted it, their outlets disappeared. So they switched to face-based on their linked for the linked architecture files, and so all of their entities held in place. And they knew visually that if the architects deleted the wall, their content was still there. Then they can actually see it and say, oh, yeah, we have an issue here. Okay. Number of segments in a conical roof. So this one's interesting because I'm not sure how many people do conical roof type designs, but I built one, a basic one like this here. And if you take a look at it, select it, and look at the properties, you'll notice there's no property information that tells me how many segments that I can have. Even if I go to the type properties, I don't have that capability. But if you double click it and go into sketch mode and select the sketch line work, then you'll get the number of full segments. So if I change it to a different value and finish my sketch, you can see the conical shape is changing. So if I increase this number, let's go to 25, let's double that, then it becomes even more segmented. So it's just a nice little feature to work with if you have to do this type of roof design. Managing work sets within linked Revit files for faster processing. So we have a linked Revit file in here, and we have several instances of them. And if we select any one of them, you'll see what their names are. For example, building F, building A, building C, building D. If I go into the Insert tab of the ribbon, go to Manage Links, you'll see the one particular linked file is there. I can click Manage Work Sets, and I can globally affect. For example, I can say, let's take the interior and close them, and hit OK. All the interiors should disappear. And so it's kind of a faster way to tell the software, you know what, for all these linked files, let's just close certain work sets, and that way it just processes things faster. I'm going to undo that for a second. Oh, by the way, the undo command doesn't affect anything you do in the manage work sets. window here. You actually have to open it back up and reload it. But you'll also notice that this particular one, called Building B, doesn't have its interior walls and that particular workset content showing. What's happening is you actually have the ability as well under Revit links to override custom for each building that you want. So here under custom, I've set mine to say custom, and I've gone over to work sets and I've basically unchecked interior. So for this particular instance, the work sets for interior are not showing up. Okay. Tips 19, 20, and 21. Set view of parts by filter. Okay. So let's go and close this. Let's do number, oh, that is 20. Okay. Let's go back to level 1. So here we have some walls, and these two walls here are actually set up where they've been turned into parts, and my parts of visibility setting in the properties palette is set to show parts. If I set it to show originals, it's just going to show the original information. Okay? By default, when you take an object and turn it into parts, it switches to part visibility to parts. The tip that we're talking about here for using filters for parts is basically creating a filter for wall parts. And if I edit it, you'll see it says wall parts. It is associated to walls. It's associated to parts. Let's switch this to like that. And you'll see it's categorized and checked under parts. And so once I've done that, I can basically just check or not check the visibility. So if I uncheck wall parts, they'll disappear. So it's a kind of a neat way to kind of handle parts if you need to. Back to the PowerPoint. 20 and 21. 20 says, use a filter to turn on and off infill walls when doors and windows are demolished. Okay. So what we mean by this is when we go in here and we go to the Modify tab and we put in a door, it puts in the door, and it infills as well once we use the Demolish command. And so now you have this little piece of wall in here that is there by default. I don't really want to see that. I kind of want it to disappear. What you can do is you can select that segment of wall, and under comments, just put something in here like infill. And once you've done this, you can create a filter for the wall infill. Again, looking at the properties of wall infill, and it's looking at walls. And if the comment equals infill, then apply the filter. And that filter basically says, I see it or I don't see it. If it's unchecked, I don't see it, and they disappear. So this one over here, I go in here and I type in infill, it disappears. Okay. 21. Use overhead line work tool to show roof line from level above. Okay. Some people do this, some people don't. It's kind of a nice little thing to do. Let's go ahead and open up that particular file. So here I'm in level 1, and I have a floor plan. I have these dashed lines that go on the outside that are actually tied to the roof. So if the roof changes, the dashed line changes as well. So how did I draw the dashed overhead lines? I'll do that for level 2. I'll head over to level 2. I'll turn my underlay on, and we'll set it to go to roof so we can see the roof. And now I want to draw the overhead lines right on the edges here. So I can head over to the, I'm going to say it. Oh, I lost it for a second. Give me 1 second. Annotate, detail line, go over here under line styles and pick overhead. Instead of drawing them, just use the pick method and then lock it. So as you pick, it locks. And when you finish, hit modify. And then we'll turn the underlay off. And so what you're left with is level 2. What you're left with is a level 2 floor plan that has dashed lines that are tied to the roof. So it's kind of neat. Nice little feature to work with if you have to. Tips 22, 23, and 24. 22 is shared checkmark within the family allows separate tagging, selecting, and scheduling. What do I mean by this? Let's go over to number 22. Let's not bother saving this. And number 22, oops, 2022. Okay, so if we zoom in here, we have this little, come on mouse, we have this desk sink counter. And if I go through the Annotate tab and I try to tag this, it'll tag this. And if you look at that T1 designation, that T1 designation is being specified here on the type mark for that kitchenette. What if I want to tag the countertop, not the entire kitchenette, or the sink that's inside? If I use the tag by category and I try to tab in, I can't really tab into that entity. It doesn't make any sense. What's happening is if I select the family and edit that family, there is another family here that's the countertop and another family here that's the sink. And if we look at the family of the sink, for example, and go into the family category and parameters window, one of the options down here is shared. And if you check it and save the file and then load it back into your kitchenette, into your family, that's the host family, we'll overwrite it, we'll save that, and we'll load it back into the project. Then what's going to happen is it should give me the ability now to tag by category and tab into that sink. And because I don't have a plumbing fixture tag, I need to load that in. So let's look for plumbing. Oops. Where is my tag? Lost my tag. Where's my plumbing folder? Interesting. I will have to do some research on this. I've lost my plumbing folder. But in any event, you should be able to find the tag, load it in, and use it. So let's do this. Let's go to Insert. Let's go to U and Plumbing Fixture Tag. And we will load that from Seek. Make life a little easier. And we'll do 2012 is fine. Come on. Sign in. Yes, sign in. Sign in. And then we'll load it into the project. And now we can use it. And it gives us a question mark, obviously, because when we tab into that sink and go to the type properties, there's no type mark designation. So if we type in P1, for example, the data shows up. Okay. Let's take a look at the next one. Demolish parts of a wall within phasing instance parameter. So let's head over back to Revit and close this out. And take a look at this one. So I have this wall here that is divided into its parts, but I also have the outer brick walls demolished, and they're showing in blue, and they're dashed. How is this possible? Over here, these walls are not set up for parts, so let's go ahead and select them and turn them into parts, great parts for them. If I try to go to the Modify tab and use the Demolish command, it won't let me do it. But if I select that brick layer, if you will, here, you'll see under phasing, you have two features, phase created by original, phase demolished by original. If you uncheck the second one, then try to use the demolish command, it will allow you to demolish it. I don't know how many people are having to do this kind of granular demolition work for parts of a wall, but it might be a useful tip. Here's another tip. White text on a black background. Let's head over to the floor plan. And I have a black masking region, and I have white text here. How did I make this happen? I have another black masking region here, and then I have another piece of text here. If I select it and go to its type properties, it's black. Let's switch it to white. It's still black. What's going on? Let's go back, and instead of making it white, change one of the RGB value designations so it's not true white. Once you've done this, it actually looks white. And you can go ahead and obviously move it wherever you need, like so. If you're doing that kind of work. An example would be maybe somebody's doing an elevation and it's a rendering and it's a negative type of rendering where it's a black background. Then you would need to have white text with leaders. Then you would run this little trick. Speaking of leaders, the leaders are white too. So if I tab into this and I move this here, let's move it here so we can actually see it. You can see the arrows as well. The leaders themselves are also white. Tip 25 and 26. Right-click to select multiple panels in a curtain wall. Let's head over to a 3D view. And most people know that when you're working with curtain panels, my mouse is jumpy. You can right-click any mullion and select several ways. But you can also do that with the panel. So as long as you tab into the panel, you can right-click and go to Select Panels and pick along the vertical grid line or along the horizontal grid line or on the host. And the reason they kind of give you this capability is maybe you want to unpin just those and switch those to some other type of quote-unquote panel. And in this case, I'm going to switch it to brick. So you can right-click and select panels in groups, if you will. Use join geometry for door openings that span two adjacent walls. Let's go back to the floor plan view. I have a wall here, and I have a door, and I have another wall that's adjacent to it. If I create a door and I place it on this wall, it creates the opening for that host. But what about this one here? I want openings for here and here. Rather than going to an elevation view, looking north of this wall, or starting from here and looking down and using Edit Profile to cut an opening in the wall, or trying to use the door opening family and put it in there, you can just use the Join Geometry command to join this to this, and it'll work. Okay? Switch back to PowerPoint. And tip 27 and 28. Use mass object shading for elevation depth. So let's go ahead and close this. Oh no, 26, cancel. Let's go to south elevation. Nope. I want 27, sorry. Close this one. And open 27. So I have an elevation here. And for those who are not aware, in Revit 2016 R2 and Revit 2017, you have depth culling capability. If you go to the visual styles and go to graphic display options, you can go to depth queuing, and you can turn that on, and you can adjust the fading at the start and the end and the fading limits as well to get it to look faded. So for example, if I do this, and I do this, and this, and I hit apply, it starts to look faded. You see that? And there are entities that are, let's actually, sorry, my bad. Let's go to a 3D view. We're looking at the building from this position here to my right, 45-degree angle. So this face is closest to me, then this face, then this face. If we use the depth culling, it kind of does this. If I turn my thin line command off, it looks like on. It looks like this. It's really hard to see unless you zoom really close in. Okay. Some people like that. Some people don't. I'm going to turn it off for now. And what I'm going to do instead is use massing. If I look at my visibility graphics dialog box, I'm going to turn on my mass objects that I created earlier. And now, because I've got mass objects in place and they have specific shading strengths, you can start to see a better level of contrast, if you will. So if I go in here and I select the mass object, for example, this one, and I right-click and override graphics by element, I can see that it's been overridden for a surface of color of black and a solid fill. The transparency is set to 0 because this object, this face of this wall, is the closest to my eyes, if you will. If I select this other mass object and go to its properties, you'll see the surface transparency has been overridden and given a 20% transparency, so it's a little lighter. So it's a kind of an old school trick that some people have used. I don't know how many people currently are using it, but you can use mass objects and this kind of graphic override to give the building elevation a sense of depth. Wall modify layer based placement in section. Huh? So what does that mean? So let's get over to the floor plan view. Let's look at this section over here. Oh, I think my mouse is dying on me. Give me a second. No mouse. Head over to this section. Turn my thin lines off. And you know what? For the sake of simplicity, for this particular tip, I'm going to delete that. We're going to get it back later, don't worry. All right, so I have a situation here where I need to show this layer of wall, this air gap of wall, this exterior plywood sheathing layer of wall to come all the way down and touch the bottom of that slab edge. If I select this wall, I go to its properties, I go to preview, I go to edit under structure. We know that we can see it in plan, but if we switch to section, you're going to be able to zoom into that section. and let's get lower. You'll see you have Modify Vertical Structure. These tools open up. If I need to, in order to get to have the ability to zoom and change that, I'm going to click Modify and zoom in here. And click this little bottom right here and unlock it. When you unlock the layers of the walls, they have to be unlocked adjacent to each other, like so. And you might have to zoom in to get that little sliver. Now that all three of those have been unlocked, I'm going to click OK and OK. And now you have two arrows that you can click and drag and pull it down. If you need to be super precise, you can just use the Align command. And there you go. So you can use this little tip to actually model the building, the layers of the exterior walls of the building to go down to the correct level that you need. And then two last tips. 29. Copy objects to the same place. Okay. Let's go back to Revit. Back to the plan view. So I want to, earlier you saw me delete that storefront. I want a storefront right at this wall. How hard is it for us to use the wall command to go to pick that storefront design, pick this curve, and try to draw it exactly, where it's supposed to be. It's going to be kind of hard. Right on that wall, it's kind of hard. It's not going to work. I've tried it. What you can do is this. You can select this wall, copy it to the clipboard, Ctrl V to paste, and enter the number 0 and hit enter. Once you've done this, click Finish up here in the contextual tab of the ribbon. It will give you the warning to let you know objects are overlapped. That's fine. Just select one of the walls, because you have two there now, and just switch it to the storefront that you want. And if you head over to the 3D view, you can see what it looks like. And you can obviously affect the design by making adjustments. For example, pulling it down or pulling it up, like so. So you can copy objects right on top of each other, if you will. And that's using the Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V with the 0 option. The last one has to deal with actually Revit fabrication parts. How many people who are in our webinar today actually have played around with the Autodesk fabrication software like Fabrication CAD MEP, Duct MEP, SMEP, or worked with the fabrication parts feature within Revit 2017 or 2016 R2? If you have, just throw it in the chat or something and let me know. Just kind of curious. So while you guys are doing that, let's go back to Revit. And all right, so for this one, we don't actually have any fabrication yet. So I'm going to build some. So if I head over to the Structure Systems tab, there is a Fabrication Part command. And this little arrow here allows you to get to the settings. If you do this, it'll open up the settings and it'll tell you what fabrication database configuration file Revit is using. You can reload the configurations if they were there once and they need to be reloaded. So I'm going to click Reload. And if you give it a second, it'll load all of the database 3D content into your Revit file. Okay. All right, and I'm going to click OK. Now that they're all in there, they're all loaded. If I use the command, it will actually open up MEP Fabrication Parts dialog box, and I can start to put in ductwork. And this is smart fabrication-based level ductwork where it snaps into position. And it also allows me to rotate with a space bar, like so. Um, and I can, kind of build. Now, the tip that we were talking about earlier was the installation aspect of it. So there's two ways to actually work with installation for Autodesk Fabrication. If you select an entity that's already been placed, you'll see under the um, mechanical portion, it may or may not show that it has installation. In this instance, it does. The reason it does is because I actually modified and altered the database file prior to working with it here in Revit. And so I forced it to have a installation of something I created called ductwork fiberglass 1-inch. You can just switch it to whatever you want, and it will actually put it in. Let's go to a hidden line view, or better yet, let's go to a wireframe view. You can start to see that. If I create another entity and put it in, the installation comes in as a default. When I use the command, the second method, in the instance property, you can specify what type you want before you click to place it, like so. And so this is how we work with inputting in installation in your ductwork as you're working with fabrication parts in Revit. For those who are in the Autodesk Fabrication software, there is CAD MEP, Duct MEP, and EST MEP. Let me open up the Duct MEP, because what you'll notice when you're working in Revit is that here, where it lists the installation specification, it doesn't give you the ability to make new ones. Revit can't do that yet. That IPM database information has to come from Autodesk Fabrication software. So let me close the software that I don't need. Come on. Come on. My computer's a little slow this morning. And if we head over here, we've got that Revit MEP Imperial Content V2. That's the database that we're using in the Revit file for fabrication. And if I go into creating a new blank job, we can head over to the, where did they put it to? Set up processes. No. We have it set. Job information. No, not job information. There is a database under fittings, under installation specifications, under installation, you have all the types that are in here. So for ductwork, you have the acoustic, the fiberglass, and the thermal lag. So you can basically make these yourself by using the commands for adding a new material. It'll copy the database, call it whatever you want, click OK. It'll commit the changes. Once you've done this to the fabrication database, in order for you to make the change applicable in Revit, you have to go back to fabrication settings and you have to reload. And once you reload, that information will show up here when you're working with fabrication and installation specification data. Kind of a workaround right now, but until Autodesk gives Revit the ability to make it on the fly yourself by clicking, for example, edit type and making the changes, that's kind of what we're stuck with. So this is supposed to go from 2:30 to 3:30. I actually hit it on the mark. I thought it was going to take a little longer, but I did cover all of the tooltips that I wanted. And let's do this. Let's go ahead and open up the floor for any questions that anybody has um, for tips and tricks. Has anybody, for those who are attending, um, did anybody find any useful tips and tricks that they didn't realize um, existed? Great. So what I'd like to do to end the webinar is, basically just a call to action for you guys. For those of you who are looking at doing or needing Revit training, just give us a call, let us know, or email me, and we can set up a schedule where I can help you with additional Revit training. If you have any questions or anything, you need anything, you can always call the office. You have my email contact information as well. You can always email me. Um, and I'll do my best to help you guys out. But I do want to say thank you very much, everybody, for their time, and I hope you guys had a good presentation. And also I forgot, for those who want the PowerPoint presentation, just shoot an email to me, and I'll send that as well. It's kind of large. I don't know why it's so big, but it is. So, and I'll stick around for about another 10 minutes or so if anybody wants to kind of hash things out.